What if the biggest secret of your life wasn't uncovered by a detective or by your own confession, but by the innocent hug of a child? A single devastating word, spoken aloud in the most powerful boardroom in the city, can unravel everything. It can expose a lie, rewrite a past, and force a billionaire to confront a truth he never knew existed. Today, we're diving into a story where the lines between wealth and hardship blur, where a mother's sacrifice meets a CEO's hidden past. This is the tale of Ilara Vance, a woman fighting tooth and nail to give her daughter a life she herself never had, and the shocking moment when her world and that of the formidable Julian Thorne collided in a way no one could have predicted. Ilara Vance moved with a silent, practiced urgency, her movements precise in the cramped space of her tiny apartment. The pre-dawn chills still clung to the air, seeping through the single, drafty window that overlooked a narrow alleyway. The cheap alarm clock, a hand-me-down from a friend, blared its tinny tune at 5:30 a.m., slicing through the quiet like a rusty blade. Ilara silenced it quickly, not wanting to wake the precious bundle sleeping soundly in the small, worn crib in the corner of the room. This was her sacred hour, a sliver of time before the demands of the day crashed down upon her. She had to shower, dress, and prepare whatever meager breakfast she could afford, all before her daughter, Lily, woke up. Lily, a bright-eyed 4-year-old with a laugh that could chase away any shadow, was Ilara's entire world. Every decision Ilara made, every sacrifice she endured, was for Lily. But lately, those sacrifices felt heavier than usual. The daycare center Lily usually attended had been forced to close temporarily due to a sudden pipe burst. Ilara had tried desperately to find an alternative for the week, calling every friend, every acquaintance, every last-minute sitter she could think of. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Her heart was a lead weight in her chest, pressing down with the twin anxieties of potentially losing her minimum-wage job at Thorne Industries and the fear of letting Lily down. Today was Tuesday, a particularly important day at the office. Julian Thorne himself, the CEO, the man who built Thorne Industries into a global powerhouse, was expected to tour their department. Ilara was just an administrative assistant, one of hundreds, but showing up late, or worse, not showing up at all, was not an option. She needed this job. Without it, the small apartment, the healthy food, Lily's worn but clean clothes, it would all disappear. She knew the rules. No children in the office. It was clearly stated in the employee handbook, a rigid policy that seemed to mock her current desperation. But what choice did she have? With a heavy sigh, Ilara made her decision. She would bring Lily with her. It was a risky, almost reckless move, but necessity was a cruel master. By 6:45 a.m., Lily was stirring, her small fist rubbing at her eyes. "Mommy?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Good morning, sunshine," Ilara whispered, already dressed in her crisp but clearly inexpensive blouse and skirt. She scooped Lily up, hugging her tightly, breathing in the sweet scent of sleep and childhood. "Today's a special adventure. We're going to Mommy's work for a little while." Lily's eyes widened. "Work? With you?" Her excitement was immediate, pure, and utterly disarming. "Yes, but it's a very big secret, okay? Super quiet, super still, and if anyone asks, you're a tiny, invisible fairy." Lily giggled, delighted by the game. "Invisible fairy," she chirped, already practicing her quiet steps. The journey to Thorne Industries was a blur of anxious glances and whispered reassurances. The bus was crowded, as usual, smelling of damp coats and stale coffee. Ilara held Lily's hand tightly, Lily's small backpack filled with a coloring book, a few crayons, and a juice box pressed against Ilara's thigh. Lily, despite her excitement, was remarkably well behaved, sensing her mother's tension. She stared out the window, occasionally pointing at a passing dog or a brightly colored sign, but always in a hushed tone. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs with every bump and jolt of the bus. What if someone saw them? What if a colleague spotted her? What if Lily made a noise? Finally, they arrived. Thorn Industries' headquarters was a towering edifice of glass and steel, a modern monolith that seemed to pierce the very clouds. Its grandeur always felt intimidating to Ilara, a constant reminder of the vast chasm between her modest existence and the lives of the people who occupied its upper floors. Security guards, impeccably dressed and stern-faced, stood at the entrance, their presence a silent deterrent to anything out of place. Ilara hurried through the revolving doors, pulling Lily along, her small hands swallowed by her own. She tried to appear nonchalant, as if bringing a child into a secure corporate building was an everyday occurrence. Once inside, Ilara navigated the bustling lobby, her eyes scanning for familiar faces. Luckily, her department was on the 5th floor, accessible by a less-used service elevator, a stroke of fortune she was immensely grateful for. They slipped into the empty elevator, Ilara pressing the button with a trembling finger. "Remember, invisible fairy," she reminded Lily, who nodded solemnly. The doors opened onto a brightly lit, sterile hallway. Ilara quickly led Lily to her cubicle, tucked away in a corner, hoping its semi-secluded position would offer some camouflage. "Okay, my love, this is your secret hideout. You can draw here, and Mommy will be right above you. If you need anything, just tap my foot, okay?" Lily, sensing her mother's seriousness in her voice, nodded again, her large eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights of the office. She crawled into her makeshift fort, pulling out her coloring book, her tiny face a mask of concentration. Ilara settled into her chair, her back to the cubicle wall, acutely aware of the small child hidden beneath her. Every rustle, every tiny cough sent a jolt of fear through her. She tried to focus on her work, typing emails, organizing files, but her attention was constantly divided. Her ears strained for any sound from below, her eyes darting nervously around the office. Meanwhile, high above, on the penthouse floor, Julian Thorne was already immersed in his day. Julian was not just a CEO, he was an institution. At 35, he had taken his family's already successful tech company and transformed it into a global empire, a titan of innovation and finance. His reputation preceded him, brilliant, ruthless, utterly dedicated to his work. He rarely smiled, and even more rarely engaged in small talk. His life was a meticulously planned schedule of meetings, international calls, and strategic decisions. Personal relationships were secondary, often non-existent. He had built an impenetrable wall around himself, a consequence, perhaps, of a lonely childhood spent in the shadow of his equally driven father, and a string of superficial relationships that had left him cynical about genuine connection. He lived for the thrill of the deal, the satisfaction of conquering new markets, the relentless pursuit of perfection. This morning was no different. He reviewed quarterly reports, barked orders at his executive team, and mentally prepared for the department tour he was scheduled to conduct. He liked to keep abreast of all levels of the company, to ensure efficiency, to spot any weak links. He viewed his employees as cogs in a finely tuned machine, each essential, but none indispensable. Emotions, personal problems, these were distractions, liabilities that had no place in the cutthroat world of corporate success. Down on the 5th floor, Ilara's morning was a tightrope walk over a chasm of dread. She managed to slip Lily a snack during a bathroom break, the relief of a quiet hallway almost overwhelming. But as the clock ticked past 10 a.m., a buzz went through the office. "He's coming," whispered a colleague. "Mr. Thorne is on his way down." Ilara's blood ran cold. This was it, the moment of truth. She stiffened, her gaze fixed on the entrance to their department, where a phalanx of executives was already gathering. Julian Thorne, a tall, imposing figure even from a distance, walked with an air of absolute authority. His dark suit seemed to absorb all the light, his sharp features carved from granite. He moved through the department, his eyes missing nothing, his expression unreadable. He paused at various cubicles, asking pointed questions,
his voice low but carrying an undeniable power. Elora huddled over her keyboard, trying to make herself small, trying to radiate an aura of invisibility. Beneath her desk, Lily, who had been remarkably quiet for hours, suddenly began to stir. She felt a frantic tap on her foot. Lily needed to go to the bathroom, now. Panic flared in her chest. Julian Thorne was only a few cubicles away, his entourage trailing behind him. She couldn't possibly take Lily to the bathroom without being seen. She couldn't risk a direct encounter. She whispered, "Hold it, sweetie, just a few more minutes, he'll be gone." But Lily, with the unerring timing of a child, was past the point of holding it. A tiny whimper escaped from her lips. Julian Thorne, ever perceptive, paused. He had been listening to a manager drone on about budget projections, but
The manager stammered. Nothing, Mr. Thorne. Perhaps just the air conditioning." Julian wasn't convinced. He slowly turned, his gaze sweeping across the cubicles until it landed, momentarily, on Elora's. It was in that precise moment that Lily, unable to contain her restlessness any longer, decided to investigate the source of the low voices. She had been coloring a bright red apple, but the soft murmurs, the sudden hush in the office, had piqued her curiosity. She saw a pair of gleaming black shoes through the gap beneath Elora's desk. Fascinated by the polished leather, she pushed aside the blanket that served as her fort wall and peeked out. Her big, innocent eyes scanned the room, bypassing the hushed, nervous employees, until they landed on the imposing figure standing just a few feet away, Julian Thorne. For a moment, the bustling office, the serious faces, the whispered conversations, all faded into the background for Lily. What she saw was not the stern CEO, the ruthless businessman. What she saw was something deep within her memory, a flicker of an image from a worn photograph, a story often repeated by her mother during quiet bedtime moments, a warmth she had always longed for. Maybe it was the sharp cut of his jaw, or the intensity in his dark eyes, or perhaps simply the way he stood, tall and strong, that triggered something profound and undeniable within her small developing mind. A sense of recognition, of belonging, washed over her. Without a moment's hesitation, before Elora could even react, before the horrified gasps of her colleagues could register, Lily scrambled out from under the desk. Her small legs, surprisingly quick, propelled her forward. She ran directly towards Julian Thorne, a wide, joyful smile splitting her face. Elora's heart stopped. Time seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl. Every eye in the department, including Julian Thorne's, was now fixed on the small child making a beeline for the CEO. Julian, mid-sentence, talking about quarterly targets, felt a small, unexpected tug on his perfectly tailored suit trousers. He looked down, his expression shifting from detached professionalism to utter bewilderment. A small child, with wide, trusting eyes and a tangle of brown hair, was clinging to his leg, her tiny arms wrapped around his knee. The silence in the department was absolute, profound. It was the kind of silence that screams louder than any noise. Lily looked up at him, her smile still radiant, completely oblivious to the shockwaves she had just sent through the room. Her voice, clear and sweet, cut through the suffocating silence like a tiny bell. "Daddy!" she chirped, her voice echoing in the hushed space. "Daddy, you're here!" The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken questions, shattering the carefully constructed order of Julian Thorne's world. Elora, frozen in horror, felt the blood drain from her face. Her worst nightmare, her most carefully guarded secret, had just been revealed by the innocent of sources. She lunged forward, a strangled apology tearing from her throat, her face burning with shame and terror. "Lily, no, I'm so sorry, Mr. Thorne. She doesn't, she just—" Words dissolved into a panicked whisper as she scooped up her bewildered daughter, her hands trembling.
Julian Thorne stood utterly motionless, his gaze fixed first on the child, then on Ilara. His face was a mask of cold disbelief, his dark eyes like chips of ice. He wasn't just confused, he was affronted. The idea of a child, his child, appearing out of nowhere, especially in the middle of a work tour, was an absurdity, an insult to his carefully ordered existence. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice dangerously low, each word precise and chilling. "Explain yourself, immediately." Ilara could only stammer, clutching Lily tighter, her mind racing for a believable excuse that wouldn't utterly destroy her. She's confused, sir. She calls everyone daddy sometimes. It's a phase. My babysitter canceled and I had nowhere else to turn. I truly apologize. I understand the rules. I know this is highly inappropriate." She kept talking, rambling on, her desperation palpable. The stares of her colleagues felt like physical blows. She could feel her career, her livelihood, slipping through her fingers. Julian, however, was not listening to her apologies. His eyes had flickered back to Lily, who was now looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and a hint of sadness, sensing the sudden change in atmosphere. Something in her eyes, a fleeting resemblance that he couldn't quite place, sparked a tiny, unsettling flicker within his carefully guarded mind. He quickly extinguished it. "Miss Vance," he interrupted, his voice sharper now, "take your daughter and leave. You are suspended pending a review of your employment. This is entirely unacceptable." Ilara's world crumbled. Suspended. That meant no pay. That meant a step closer to homelessness. She nodded numbly, unable to meet his gaze, unable to even formulate another word. She turned and practically ran out of the department, Lily clinging to her neck, her small face buried in Ilara's shoulder. The whispered conversations erupted behind them, a torrent of speculation and judgment that Ilara could almost feel physically. Back in the tiny apartment, the silence was deafening, broken only by Lily's occasional sniffles. Ilara held her daughter close, tears silently streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, sweetie," she whispered, stroking Lily's hair. "Mommy messed up." Lily looked up, her eyes still a little red. Why was Daddy mad? The question cut Ilara to the core. He wasn't mad at you, baby. He didn't understand. How could she explain the complexities of her secret to a 4-year-old? How could she explain the shame, the fear, the desperation that had led her to keep the truth hidden for so long? As the hours passed, Ilara paced her small living room, the weight of her potential employment pressing down on her. Her phone remained silent, no calls from HR, just the looming dread. She replayed the scene in her mind 100 times. Lily's innocent, "Daddy!" Julian Thorne's icy gaze, the absolute, undeniable proof that her past had finally caught up with her in the most catastrophic of ways. Back at Thorne Industries, the incident continued to reverberate long after Ilara and Lily had left. Julian Thorne had resumed his tour, outwardly composed, but his focus was shattered. The manager he had been speaking with noticed his distraction, the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his tie. The incident was unprecedented. A child in the office was one thing, but a child calling the CEO daddy? The whispers had spread like wildfire throughout the building. Later that afternoon, alone in his sprawling minimalist office, Julian found himself unable to concentrate. The image of the small child clinging to his leg, her innocent face, her clear, ringing voice, kept replaying in his mind. "Daddy," he scoffed. Ridiculous. He had no children. He had never even been married. His relationships were fleeting, carefully managed, and always ended long before any serious commitment could take root. Yet a nagging feeling persisted. The child's eyes. There was something familiar about them, a faint echo of his own dark gaze, softened by innocence. He called his assistant. "Get me Ms. Ilara Vance's personnel file, everything," and discreetly. His assistant, accustomed to Julian's unusual requests, complied without question. Within minutes, a digital file landed on Julian's encrypted tablet. He opened it, his fingers almost reluctant. He scanned the basic information: name, address in a low-income neighborhood, employment history, a few standard references. Then he saw it. Under Emergency Contact, there was a name and a phone number for Lily Vance, daughter. Birth date. He did a quick mental calculation. 4 years old, the same age as the child who had just called him Daddy. A cold dread began to seep into Julian's carefully guarded heart. He scrolled further, looking for any other clues. There was nothing explicit. No mention of a father, no partner. Ilara Vance was a single mother. He looked at her picture on the file, a simple, somewhat grainy ID photo. He remembered her from earlier, her face pale with terror. She was pretty, in a quiet, understated way. And her eyes were different color than Lily's, but the shape, the intensity, had a familiar quality. Then a memory, long buried, began to surface. It was a fragment, a hazy recollection from nearly 5 years ago. He had been younger, in his late 20s, still grappling with the weight of his family's legacy, still prone to fleeting indulgences, before he fully embraced the relentless discipline of his current life.
He dismissed his assistant for the day, plunging his office into a deeper silence. He spent hours poring over the file, the fragments of memory coalescing into a horrifyingly plausible scenario. He had been a different man then, perhaps less guarded, more reckless. He had been so consumed by his own ambition, so convinced that anything outside of work was a distraction, that he had overlooked the profound consequences of his actions. The next morning, Julian Thorne did something he almost never did. He canceled his entire schedule. He knew Ilara's address from her personnel file. He knew he had to confront her, to get answers, to either confirm or deny the terrifying truth that had begun to take root in his mind. He drove his sleek black car, not to his corporate office, but to the run-down neighborhood listed on Ilara's file. The contrast between his luxurious vehicle and the dilapidated apartment buildings was stark, almost jarring. He parked down the street, observing the building, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. He watched as Ilara, looking tired but determined, emerged from the building, holding Lily's hand, heading towards a small park across the street. He got out of his car, his powerful stride carrying him towards them. Ilara saw him immediately. Her head shot up, her eyes widening in a mixture of fear and defiance. Lily, seeing her mother's sudden tension, clutched Ilara's hand tighter. Julian approached, his face a mask of controlled intensity. "Ms. Vance," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, "we need to talk." Ilara's breath hitched. She pulled Lily slightly behind her. "Mr. Thorne, I don't think there's anything left to discuss. I understand I've been suspended. I'll await your decision from HR." She tried to sound detached, professional, but her heart was pounding. Julian's eyes, however, were not on her. They were on Lily, who was peeking out from behind Ilara's leg, her gaze fixed on him with a mixture of curiosity and a little bit of fear. "No," Julian said, his voice softer than Ilara had ever heard it. "This isn't about your employment anymore. This is about Lily." Ilara's resolve crumbled. She knew, he knew. There was no escaping it now. She bent down, gently squeezing Lily's shoulder. "Sweetie, can you go play on the swings for a little bit? Mommy needs to talk to this gentleman for a moment." Lily, sensing the seriousness in her mother's tone, nodded, glancing at Julian one last time before trotting towards the playground.
her small backpack bouncing with each step. Once Lily was out of earshot, Ilara turned to Julian, her face pale. "What do you want, Mr. Thorne?" Is she my daughter, Ilara?" The question hung between them, raw and heavy. Julian rarely asked questions he wasn't sure of the answer to, but this was different. He needed to hear it. Ilara closed her eyes for a moment, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. When she opened them, they were filled with a fierce, protective fire. "Yes," she said, her voice clear now, unwavering. "Lily is your daughter." Julian felt a jolt go through him, a strange mix of shock, anger, and a bewildering sense of something else he couldn't quite name. "Why?" he demanded, his voice hardening. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep this from me for 4 years?" His mind raced, fueled by betrayal. Had she been planning this? Was this some elaborate scheme to extort money from him? Ilara flinched at the accusation in his tone. "Extort you? Are you serious?" Her laugh was hollow, bitter. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I enjoyed living hand to mouth, struggling every single day, just to keep a roof over her head when I could have, what, come knocking on your door, a nobody with your illegitimate child, just to be dismissed as a gold digger, to be ruined by your power?" She took a step closer, her voice rising, fueled by years of suppressed pain and resentment. "Do you even remember that night, Mr. Thorne? Or was I just another anonymous face in a crowd for you? You left before morning, left money on the bedside table like I was nothing. What was I supposed to do? Call your mansion? Hello, Mr. Thorne, remember that one night? Well, surprise, you're a father. Do you honestly believe you would have welcomed that news with open arms? Or would you have sent your lawyers after me, destroyed my life, and taken my child away?" Her voice broke, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I wanted to protect her, Julian. From your world. From the shame. From being just a paternity test result to a man who didn't even know she existed." Julian was taken aback by the raw emotion in her voice, by the depth of her anger and her pain. Her words, sharp and cutting, struck a chord of uncomfortable truth. He did remember leaving money. He remembered the detached cruelty of it, the cold efficiency. He had justified it at the time as minimizing complications. Now he saw it through her eyes, and the shame was a bitter taste in his mouth. I didn't know," he said, the words feeling inadequate, hollow. "Exactly," Ilara retorted, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. "You didn't know because you didn't care to, and I wasn't going to force you to." They stood in silence for a long moment, the sounds of children playing in the park a stark contrast to the heavy weight of their conversation. Julian looked towards Lily, swinging high on the playground, her laughter carried on the breeze. His child. A daughter. The words echoed in his mind, slowly, profoundly, sinking in. He had built an empire, controlled vast sums of money, influenced markets, but he had entirely missed the most important creation of his life. "What now?" Julian finally asked, his voice softer, laced with a vulnerability Ilara had never imagined he possessed. Ilara shrugged, a weary gesture. "I don't know. I guess you'll do what you always do. Send your lawyers, demand DNA tests, probably try to buy me off or take her away." Her tone was resigned, already bracing for the inevitable. Julian shook his head, slowly. "No, not like that. I need to understand. I need to get to know her." He looked back at Lily, a strange, unfamiliar longing in his chest. "I need to be a father." Ilara looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. "A father? After 4 years?"
Yes, he insisted, his eyes intense. I made a mistake, Ilara. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. I was selfish, arrogant, and blind, but I want to make it right. Not with money, not with lawyers, with time, with presence. He paused, searching her face for any sign of acceptance. I want to be a part of her life, if you'll let me. The offer hung in the air. It wasn't what Ilara expected. She had prepared for a battle, for legal threats, for a fight over custody and finances. This was different. It was genuine. She looked into his eyes, searching for deceit, but found only a raw, uncharacteristic sincerity. The powerful, unyielding Julian Thorne seemed to have momentarily vanished, replaced by a man grappling with a profound, life-altering truth. I don't want your money, Julian. I don't want anything from you except for you to genuinely care about Lily. If you want to be a father, truly be a father, then you'll prove it. Not with grand gestures, but with consistency, with presence, with love. A flicker of relief crossed Julian's face. I understand. I will. He took a deep breath. And what about your job? Your suspension? Ilara shrugged. It doesn't matter now. I just need to find another one. No, Julian said decisively. Your suspension is lifted, effective immediately. And we'll discuss your role and how to best support you and Lily, without any strings attached. He looked at her, a hint of something new in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. Respect. And perhaps a nascent curiosity about the woman who had quietly carried his greatest secret for so long. I'll arrange for a DNA test for confirmation, but regardless of the outcome, I want to be a part of Lily's life. And I want to get to know you, Ilara. Properly this time. Over the next few weeks, Julian Thorne's carefully structured life underwent a seismic shift. The DNA test confirmed what both already knew. Lily was his daughter. The initial period was awkward, fraught with tension and uncertainty. Julian, used to commanding boardrooms, found himself completely out of his depth with a 4-year-old. His attempts at conversation.
As Julian spent more time with Lily, he inevitably spent more time with Ilara. He saw her strength, her quiet dignity, the fierce love that burned in her eyes for their daughter. He witnessed her resilience, her humor, her unwavering dedication. He saw past the poor single mom, past the administrative assistant, to the woman he had met briefly that one night, the woman he had so carelessly dismissed. He found himself increasingly drawn to her, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine, growing admiration, and something akin to a quiet wonder. Ilara, in turn, began to see beyond the ruthless CEO. She saw a man who was learning, who was willing to humble himself, who was desperate to make amends. She saw the genuine warmth in his eyes when he looked at Lily, the way his stern face softened into an unfamiliar smile. She saw his fumbling attempts to connect, his awkwardness with emotions, and recognized a loneliness that mirrored her own, despite their vastly different worlds. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, moving beyond Lily to shared glances, subtle smiles, and an unspoken understanding that began to bridge the gap between their past and their present. One evening, after Julian had dropped Lily off and lingered longer than usual, a comfortable silence settled between them in Ilara's small living room. Lily was asleep in her crib. Ilara, Julian began, his voice low, I know I messed up. I missed out on 4 years of Lily's life and I'll regret that forever. But I want to be more than just a presence in her life. I want to be a real father, a present father. And I want to be more than just Lily's father to you. He met her gaze, his dark eyes vulnerable. I know this is fast and complicated, but I'm realizing how much I've missed, how much I want. I want a future with both of you, if you'll let me try. Ilara's heart pounded. This was it, the moment she had never dared to dream of,
the fragile possibility of a real family, of a love that transcended their starkly different worlds. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and deeply uncertain. But looking at Julian, truly looking at the man he was becoming, she saw a flicker of hope. She saw a chance for not just Lily, but for herself. A chance to heal, to build, to finally find a place where all three of them could belong. The world would talk, the headlines would scream, the scandal would rage, but standing there, in her humble living room, with the man who was both her greatest pain and her greatest hope, Ilara knew one thing. Lily's innocent daddy had not just exposed a secret. It had opened the door to a future she never knew was possible. A future where a billionaire CEO was learning to be a father, and perhaps finding love in the most unexpected of places. Watch the next chapter of Ilara and Julian's story now.